that, we are off. This is the week 2 lecture supplement for social psychology. I am your instructor, Melissa Stockham. And yes, once again today you're getting the flowers. Sorry about that. I'm still not feeling up to 100%, and I'm really not too stoked about you guys seeing what I look like right now. So please indulge me. I'll try to feel at least well enough to be on camera next week. I am going to the doctor tomorrow. But this week we talk about how the individual develops over time. This is a topic known as developmental psychology. To tell the truth, we could talk about developmental psychology for an entire semester and barely scratch the surface of what we need to know. We could talk about it for an entire year and not have a completely conclusive study of developmental psychology. We'll learn more and more about this as we go on. Why is the study of developmental psychology important? Because with an understanding of developmental psychology, we have a better way of understanding health. We have a better way of understanding how people react, how people respond in groups. And so there's a lot of utility in studying developmental psychology. That's why most psychology programs at the major universities usually have at least several different developmental psychologists who are researchers. So the first question is, how do we study development? Well, we study development. We're studying how the person both changes and stays the same over time. So there are a number of ways we can study it. One of the easier ways is to do what we call a cross-sectional study. What is a cross-sectional study? That is when we interview different individuals at the same point in time. Let's say we want to understand attitudes towards current political events. That's usually one that gets a lot of attention, especially right now. And we interview, let's say, assuming a 10-year-old wouldn't have much of an opinion except for whether or not the president looks like his or her parents. Let's say we start at 20, we interview a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, or even a 20-year-old, a 25-year-old, a 30-year-old, and a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old, 70-year-old. Or we could, again, go by fives. So that can give us a lot of information. It can give us a lot of, that's useful information. It can give us a lot of information relatively quickly. But what you miss by interviewing people on a cross-sectional basis is what we call the cohort effect. What is a cohort? A cohort is a group of individuals who came of age at approximately the same time and place, the same point in historical time, and relatively the same environment. I am in my late 40s. I am part of a group of individuals who in American culture are regarded as Generation X. Generation X is the cohort that was born between 1965 and 1980. It's kind of nebulous where it ends. The reasons why Generation X is a unique generation is, one, there are not a lot of us. This was the first generation that came of age after the mass accessibility of birth control, so quite frankly, our parents didn't want a lot of us. So, but also because there are not as many of us as there are of the two generations beside us, the boomers, who were born between 45 and 65, were born during a time of mass prosperity. Basically, their fathers came home from World War II and during a time of economic prosperity, and huge families came to be as a result of that. Generation X came around, there are not a lot of us. And then the generation behind us is the millennials. Well, there's also a generation from that was born between 1977 and 1985 that are considered either Generation Y or the Xennials, depending on which internet report you read. So again, how are their experiences different from that of Generation X? And the millennials came of age at a time in which there was a lot of new understanding about parenting. They were usually either the late in life babies of the boomers, and what does that mean? Or they were the babies of the Gen Xers. They were raised at a time when there was a lot of attention paid to what we say and how, concern for their feelings. I mean, we in Gen X like to make fun of millennials because we point out they got trophies for participation, and we didn't get any. But then again, there's other things. You know, my husband has often said that we in Gen X need to look at ourselves as the bridge generation between the boomers and the millennials. And I say that's probably true, because if it weren't for us, they'd be at each other's throats. They have kind of the same values, and their values are completely in opposition to the other side. So you have to look at it from that perspective as well. But so you miss that, having that understanding. If you interview somebody who came of age during the boomers' childhood, you might find somebody who's very optimistic, thinks government is good. I mean, this was the time when Kennedy was president, where there was optimism that the world was going to be a brave new world, a new frontier, as JFK will call it. You interview a Gen Xer, when they came around, Watergate happened. And then after Watergate, we had Carter and the Malaise speech. And so then Iran-Contra and so forth. So a time of deep cynicism towards government and its usefulness. Millennials often, have a different perspective completely. They trust government. The idea is that government hasn't let them down during their lifetimes. I mean, a lot of millennials were born after 9/11, so the post 9/11 world is the only world I know. So anyway, you have to look at that. Then the other type of study is called a longitudinal study. A longitudinal study is when you interview the same person at different times in their life. The nice thing about a longitudinal study is it helps you to see consistencies in the person's life, where that could get misplaced in a cross-sectional study. The downside is it takes a long time to do, because you gotta wait for the person to grow up. So it takes a long time. Usually when a college or university has a longitudinal study, it's kind of the centerpiece of their research department, like the Framingham, Massachusetts study. They studied the residents of a small town in Massachusetts called Framingham, and this is a famous study. So they're... so you can learn different things from different studies, but you just need to be aware of the limits of your research. The dimensions of development. The major ones are physical development. We all know what this is. We get older, we get taller, we get fatter, we get whatever. And as we age, things change as well. So that's one of them. Second is cognitive, how your mind works over time. How does your mind learn to solve problems? And how does intelligence change over time? Last is socio-emotional. Socio-emotional is a study of how the person changes emotionally and and reacts to their environment over time. So there's 3 different dimensions. There's other ones too. Like one of the most famous studies of moral development was Kohlberg. He studied moral development in children. The problem is he found that moral development was very different in men and women, and there was a suggestion that maybe women didn't develop morally to the same degree as men did. You can imagine there was a huge uproar about that. So a researcher named Carol Gilligan came along, and Carol Gilligan did a study on what she considered to be the most challenging moral dilemma a woman finds himself in, that was uniquely found in. She interviewed women who were in the waiting room of an abortion clinic. So she said that was probably the hardest moral problem that a woman has to make, and it is unique to women. Last I checked, men don't have babies. So, but that's moral development. And then but the others, the main ones are going to be physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional. Physical, of course, how we change physiologically, basic biology class. And how we stay the same over time, and how influences from earlier in life impact us later in life in that sense. When we look at cognitive, the main theory is Piaget. Piaget studied cognitive development in children, came up with ideas like object permanence and so forth. And then socio-emotional, there's several. There's Freud, there's Jung, there's a number of different theorists who provide good insight into how we develop and change over time. Another thing is when you look at the stages of development, we obviously have prenatal. We have a better understanding of how we develop, how things that happen in the womb, and even genetics can impact us later in life. If you come from a family of people with a history of a particular disease, it's more likely you're going to tell you, even if it's a disease like diabetes where it develops over time, or type 2 diabetes where it develops over time. So, in prenatal we have an understanding, but you got to remember though, we're a lot more resilient than I think we often are led to believe. I mean, again, if I can use my experience as a Gen Xer, our mothers smoked when they were pregnant with us. They drank when they were pregnant with us. They ate, if they were into sushi, they ate sushi. They ate undercooked meat. They ate tuna. They cleaned out kitty litter boxes. And we all turned out relatively fine. So, you know, yeah, and we all scowl when we see a pregnant woman smoking, but, you know, at the same time, you know, it's not doom for a child if their mother smoked when they were, you know. When we look at infancy and childhood, there are some concerns about different kind of chemicals. There was a big scare a couple years ago in Flint, Michigan, because the water in Flint was found to have substantial amounts of lead, and even more alarming, the people of Flint were lied to about the amount of lead in the water. So, of course, there was a lot of finger pointing on that and trying to fix the blame rather than to fix the problem, in my opinion. But anyway, but we have the stage of infancy, which usually is from birth to 18 months, infancy, toddlerhood, 18 months to 3 years, early childhood, 3 to 6, late childhood, 6 to approximately 12. The reason these are more demarcated is because a lot of changes, as you might guess, happen during this very formative and foundational time. That's why if there's any problems in the environment, that can become very problematic for the children. I'm an attorney. Part of my job is I do a lot of court-appointed work with dependency. What is dependency? In the state of Florida, if there is a reason to suggest child abuse or neglect, a dependency petition is opened by the Department of Children and Families. I usually come in to represent the parents during these hearings. And oh, the stories I have heard. If I had $1 for every time I heard, I'm a good parent, I don't know, the state's just picking on me, I wouldn't have to do any more work. I could work for free. So, but that's not the luxury I have. So, adolescence is a stage of development that is very, very questionable because it starts with a biological marker, usually puberty, which has biological things you see. But then, when does it end? Used to be the idea is it ended when people assumed adult responsibilities. Usually that was either getting married or having a baby or moving out of the house. But the thing is, today people do that a lot later if they do it at all. You know, what if you get married for the first time at 40? Are you therefore, were you an adolescent until you were 40? I know people who were an adolescent until they were 40. But, you know, so the question is, when does adolescence end? When you look at early adulthood, it's generally thought of as from your 20s to your mid-40s. Most people in that point in their lives are focused on, they're usually at their peak physical condition, and they're focused on building a world based around the ideas of love and work. Middle adulthood is from 45 to 65. There are certain definite physical changes. If you have not reached that age yet, stay tuned. I'm being sarcastic. It's not pleasant. Some have actually argued that we need to start counseling women. You know, we talk to young girls about puberty and the changes associated with puberty. We need to start talking, some argue we need to start talking to women about the changes that happen around the time of menopause, which is the main marker for middle adulthood is when you start menopause. The idea you tell, because women, when that you find when you get older that you know it's a lot harder to keep weight off if you can at all. Used to be that you could just exercise and your diet could be whatever and you could still maintain a thin figure, as culture has told us that women need to. But interestingly, not so much about men. That could be one of the reasons why women live longer. But the fact is, you know, some have argued we need to tell them, yeah, you're going to get fat around your midsection and your thighs, and there's not a lot you can do about it. So don't blame yourself for it. And people are going to treat you differently. When you're in your 20s and 30s, you are the belle of the ball. When you hit your 40s and 50s, you tend to be ignored. People, of course, who have tried to ignore me in certain circumstances have found themselves in a world of hurt because I tend to be a slightly vindictive person, but same time, I don't go where I'm not appreciated. And some people have had to beg me to come back to places like, anyway. But late adulthood is seen as generally 65 to usually death. However, we're beginning to have a better understanding of older people, meaning people over the age of 85. We didn't usually have, up until recently in historical time, we didn't have a lot of people reaching that old. You know, because of one reason or another. I mean, you were considered pretty much an adult at, you know, during the industrial area. I mean, my granddad quit school when he was 12 because he had to take care of the family farm. Today, that would be cause for suggesting child abuse, but then we didn't have Social Security and other things back then that could help families in that situation. My grandfather's father died when he was 12, so he had to. You were considered old enough to assume adult responsibilities at 12. Today, we would consider that abuse for a child to have to go through that. And basically you lived until maybe you were in your 40s. Today, thanks to improved health conditions, people can expect to live well into their 80s or even 90s. I mean, George H.W. Bush just passed away at the age of 93. My grandmother always said that if you reach the age of 80, anything after that is borrowed time. My grandmother was a very devout Christian, and she knew the Bible backwards and forwards, so she told me that. She herself lived to 94. Why did she live to 94? Because she never smoked, she never drank. She drank one beer her entire life. But then she lived on fried food. So, you know, you never can really tell. But, you know, we have a better understanding now of later adulthood and the fact that it does have its own changes as well. But the most important thing, yes, there are changes that happen over time. However, you know, we change and we stay the same. So that's important to remember. And this has gone way too long, but I will look forward to seeing you in the chat room. Take care. Bye-bye.